ask Neil any more questions, we can do questions from both speakers at the end. But thank you very much for that. It was actually very inspirational. And we'd like to welcome Dr. Ang Swee.
Audience, I really appreciate your coming, and because I know of your commitment to this, and I've always admired you. Okay, just now Neil has paid reference to this, has referred to this. That's the map of Palestine. Okay? Over the years, you can Google it and you can see how Palestine itself has diminished and diminished and diminished. And although this stopped at 2000, what actually happened now is this bit, which is Palestinian land, which is green on that, has been walled up, so making it concrete, so that it's very hard to reverse. What you also do not understand, you might not hear, is the number of settlers in the West Bank. It's nearly 500,000, 450,000. So that's a lot of settlers. But I'm here to talk to you about Gaza, and we were all outraged. It's a year ago when we were watching on our television Christmas programs, when suddenly we saw scenes of Gaza being bombed. For those of us who are committed to the Palestinians, we know that Gaza has been under almost complete siege since 2006. Food, medicine and water were denied to people in Gaza, and for 50 days before the bombardment of Gaza, the siege was almost complete. So Gaza was starving, Gaza was ill, and it's winter and Gaza was cold. And then the bombardment started. And that was when all of us were completely outraged. Now it's nearly a year. In fact, in 3 weeks' time, it will be the anniversary of the bombardment of Gaza. And you'll find that most of the news, especially the BBC, has gone. We do not publish about it anymore. And even the Goldstone report, we don't give it the kind of position that we ought to. But I'm not here to arbitrate and talk about the news or events. I'm here to tell you a very personal story. For those of us who have not been to Gaza, and for those of us who might be lucky enough to go to Gaza within the next few months, this bit of Gaza is still there. It's Khan Yunis, and you know that Gaza is one of the most densely populated area in the whole world. People argue with me and say it's not so. It is. It's 1.5 million people squashed in a bit of land the size of the Isle of Wight. So that's Gaza. So if you imagine bombs falling on this kind of territory, on this kind of buildings, on this kind of homes, the damage that will be done to the people there. But I learned the name Gaza not from the books. I learned the name Gaza in 1982 when I first volunteered and went to work in Lebanon. Most of you were not even born then, okay, except a few of us were old enough. In 1982, the same images were on the television. Israeli bombs, Israeli planes dropping bombs on a country which I can't even place mentally. The country is called Lebanon. And day after day, I saw people being killed, children being wounded, buildings being bombed. Finally, I could handle it no more. I was working in St. Thomas's, which is part of your guys' trust. I just got my FRCS and was doing my special registrar rotation. And I was working in St. Thomas's, and one day, and I saw this and I just cannot understand. Why did that strike me so much? Because I'll tell you a bit of my background. I grew up to be really respectful of Israel as a country. My mother, my late mother, was a socialist, and she has brought me up with a lot of understanding of what happened during the Second World War and about what happened to the Jewish people during the Second World War and before. And so Israel, emotionally I was very close to Israel. And also I became a Christian, so I taught Sunday school, I taught the Old Testament, Just now, Neil talked about all the blockages and checkpoints in the West Bank. There's 600 over of them, but as an Old Testament fanatic, I can tell you, there are also 600 over rules in the book of Leviticus, which the Jews have to observe, so that's strange, I can tell you. So anyway, I went to Lebanon, and I landed up in a hospital called Gaza Hospital, right in Sabra and Shatila refugee camp, and this is Gaza Hospital, which I first worked. And of course, I learned that Gaza was not any old name. This hospital was built in memory of the Gaza Strip. And they want to remember the Gaza Strip because the people living in Sabra and Shatila and the refugees in Lebanon, at that time about 350,000 of them, will never be able to return to Gaza. So within the exile, within the refugee camps, they built schools, they built hospitals, and I happened to be put to Gaza Hospital. Gaza Hospital overlooked Sabra and Shatila refugee camp. I never knew refugee camps existed. I know that there were Palestinian terrorists because the newspapers say they were. I know that they were called fanatics. They were called hijackers, Arab haters. But here, from Gaza Hospital, I could see the Palestinian refugee camp. After the day's work, I would come down to make friends with the people of refugee camp. It was a very special time because that was August 1982 when the ceasefire just began. And the ceasefire in Lebanon was purchased at the price of the evacuation of the PLO. You are too young to remember, but 14,000 Palestinians were forced and deported from Lebanon in exchange for the peace. Now these are able-bodied men, so they left behind mothers, sisters, wives, and children, and peace returned to Lebanon. Sabra and Shatila were badly bombarded, but anyway, the elderly, the women, came back with their children to rebuild their lives. And from the top of Gaza's hospital, which is 11 floors, I can see new families coming back. Old men coming back with women, without husbands, with wounded children to pick up their lives. And it's true, the generosity of these people won my heart straight away. Despite their own misery, their own loss, the weeks of bombardment before, the loss of their homes, the loss of their families, their entire hospital. Within these refugee camps, I learned my first Arabic. I learned how to cook Arabic coffee. I learned about Palestinian embroidery. They're absolutely beautiful. And also the history of Palestine, which were not printed in newspapers. I learned how when the state of Israel was created, at least 800,000 Palestinians were dispossessed, and they walked across the border of British Mandate Palestine to find themselves refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan. Many of them never able to return, and that was 1948. I want you to learn a word. It is an Arabic word. It's called Nakba. The Palestinians called it Nakba, the catastrophe, the beginning of their dispossession. So that was 1948. And that was a time when they actually lost their homes and they went into exile. And 1982, several generations later, I found them in those refugee camps. Of course, they're no longer tents. If you go to Gaza today, northern Gaza is tents because it's been bomb flat. 21,000 homes have been destroyed. So many Palestinians are reduced to living back in tents now. But the tents of 1948 has given way to buildings, to a refugee camp, and actually a town. But that time, after the evacuation of PLO, we thought that there's going to be peace. And I remember so well that in September, beginning of September 1982, there were peace plans all over the place, Murphy, Habib, and so on and so forth. So it's not new. And all of them fell apart. And today, there's still no peace. We can discuss that later.